want to talk about beauty, but with a few themes. Beauty, does it have an evolutionary advantage? It's a subject that's been covered for hundreds of years, but in the rise of the robot and the machine, perhaps it's relevant again. Number two is vicarious beauty. How do we appreciate things in the era of the selfie and the smartphone? And then beauty when it comes to robots. How do we project that? What's important and what's not? Let's begin. So, firstly, there was nothing. There was nature. There was no man. Was there beauty? Who knows? Because really, I think beauty is in the eye of the observer. And without man, it really is a moot point. Was it a beautiful sunrise? Was it not a beautiful sunrise? Who knows? But then one day man arrived, and suddenly there was beauty. Now, for me, what was interesting is beauty just this artificial construct, perhaps like art, something nice to put on the wall? Or is there something innate to it? Is there an evolutionary advantage to beauty? And I think that's really important as we look at where we go with the future. Because if beauty is just a nice to have, then the rise of the robots is a world that perhaps isn't appealing to us. Or how do we create the robots and give them desires? Is beauty a part of it or not? And I thought that actually the origin of beauty was that man saw that beautiful sunrise and it was important. It meant that warmth had arrived, the hours of darkness had disappeared. Maybe when they smelt the fruit, it meant it was safe to eat. And later on, those scents became associated with something that was useful. And in the same way the cockroach knew that this was good food and bad food, so man did. But man, being a little smarter, could somehow link these memories together and begin to abstract them so that the sunrise on its own or the smell of the perfume could trigger these memories and evoke these things. And that becomes important as we go forward. So, cut to a long time later. There should be a few more slides of man carrying a mobile phone and so on. And now we have the rise of the machine. We have man's basic desires fulfilled. The sun, of course, it's needed in a climactic way, but it's not needed truly on a daily basis. You control your electric light, you control your heat, at least in the short term. Maybe the sun is undesirable on a Saturday morning when you want to sleep in. But nonetheless, we now create this artificial. We've separated the beauty and the requirement for it. But also, as we now have machines and we create our own things, we have the possibility to project beauty onto the things that we create. And so we'll start with something benign, something undoubtedly beautiful, maybe not to the technologists, but I would hope that everyone here sees this as a beautiful item. Why is it beautiful? Firstly, it conveys power. We know it's a jet engine, but we admire the intricate detail. We love how the engineers put all the effort into it. We admire the shiny metal. We admire perhaps why they went to more effort than they truly needed to for the function. And I think there we start seeing the difference between form and function. On the one hand, we potentially admire the functionality of the jet engine. It helped us, many of us, get to the event today. But we also admire the form. And the form starts separating out an innate, abstracted set of desires, wishes that we can portray on that. And we can perhaps see ourselves as engineers and technologists being inspired that the next time we create something, it can be more than merely just the functionality. Of course, we now see the rise of wearables, robots that I call huggables. And from the humble smartwatch to wearables that we see adorning our clothes, man and machine are becoming linked together. And is that going to be a world that will, in fact, intensify emotions, our souls and passions and beauties? Or maybe that spacesuit is cold, uncomfortable, poorly designed. How can we make sure that all of the things that we're creating are actually there to enhance our sense of enjoyment, not just the functionality? But it also starts conflicting us as we recognize that we always have with nature the beautiful sound of the storm, but actually it's quite destructive. But it was not that interesting an argument until man started having the power to create these things that you could see as beautiful on one hand and destructive on the other. And this is, of course, one of the first hydrogen bombs, an item of true mass destruction. But as a young teenager, I loved this photo. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I had a giant poster of it above my bed for years, and I knew it was a hydrogen bomb. I kind of put that aside. I saw it merely for the things that man could accomplish. It was beautiful in its own right. It's got lots of nature elements, the lighting, the clouds, the drama, the fact the island isn't going to exist in a few milliseconds' time. But I think today I would probably think more about the bad bits of it, and I'd admire it. I may still have that on the wall. I haven't right now, but I could. But it would be almost as a reference to the damage that could be done rather than just for the beauty of the item itself. But of course, we now look at something that's perhaps more ominous and more challenging. A stealth bomber, an item of clear destructive capability engineered with just one thing in mind, to deliver a lethal payload. But we can still admire it. It's got nostrils of an animal. It's got haunches. It's been designed by the engineers. I'm not sure they truly needed to make it look that nice. It's sort of modeled maybe on a manta ray or something. It evokes some animal passions. How many people need to see the top of one of these? Maybe they'll sell more if it looks beautiful. It's hard to say, but we can now, on the one hand, admire the beauty and the composition of the image, but in our minds still be aware of the destructive power. This gets challenged slightly further as we turn to the drone. And there are two things significant. Three, perhaps it's not quite as pretty as the nice stealth bomber. The picture's not as great. But two things are important. One, there is no pilot. So in fact, it is the rise of the robot. Yeah, of course, in this case, it's largely controlled by humans, but that's a short-term thing. But on the other hand, if you notice on the right side of the image, small problem, there are two missiles missing from the left wing. And those missiles have, either they forgot to load them, or they're about to load them, or they have delivered their destructive payload. And so here our look at the image, the nostrils maybe evoke some animal, but it's heavily tempted. The vehicle in the background, the clear military overtone, I think it's harder to perceive the beauty of it. We now are consumed by the destructive power. So I think let's go back to something more force for good. This, of course, is the Large Hadron Collider. And I think now comes the theme of how we appreciate beauty naively or when we understand it. And when the telescope was invented, it was said that the ability to see stars, to understand how the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, how the moon rose and the gravitational forces would lead to a reduction in our perception of beauty of the heavens. Perhaps when we perceived it as a divine body, a divine sphere, that led to certain visions that we saw as beautiful. But actually, when we know it's just mathematics, everything's following a preordained path, there's nothing we can do to affect it, but in fact we can create it ourselves, it was said that there goes beauty. And I think that's largely summed up in this image. For us, we admire the amazing amount of effort. We admire the symmetry. We admire the composition of the photo, the tiny man dwarfed there, the enormous power this will eventually unleash, in this case, hopefully for good. But we also, other than very few of us, know anything about the underlying function. And perhaps the scientists who created it look right through the beauty. They see no beauty. They see a lot of funding requests. They see a lot of hard work, and they look to the underlying functionality of the item. And so for me, what's really interesting as we look to things, whether it be nature or things that we can create, are we looking at the outside, the manifestation, or are we looking at the functionality? Can we divorce the beauty of the outside, and even if we know what's on the inside, be it mathematics or be it a weapon of death? The next step, of course, is not just the machine, but it's pure mathematical constructs. It's the rise of the virtual. Fractals have been around for a while. And I think what's slightly different is, in a sense, this wasn't created by man. This was created purely by mathematics, although, of course, curated and visualized and chosen the prettier patterns by man. And here we are starting to appreciate a beauty that we know it's, in a sense, man-made, because we created the means of visualizing it. We know there is no nature as a parallel for it. It's pure form. I think now I want to spend a few minutes exploring further the one man's beauty. And you know, when you go to the airport, you see a thing, these two photos identical side by side saying pain or pleasure or happiness or despair or eco and, and so on. And I think here we are really taken to the limit of, is this beauty or is this devastation? On the one hand, it's an item of beauty. You would see this in an art gallery. In fact, I did see it in an art gallery. On the other hand, it's a scene of mass devastation. Over here we have something equally where we're torn between we don't want to be there, we dislike the horror of it, but we appreciate being able to see it. And that then leads to what I see as the next evolution in beauty and art, which is, once upon a time, you had to be there to appreciate it. And then painters could go off into foreign lands and they could paint the Galapagos Islands or merely the church down the road, and you could appreciate something that someone else had put there for you. But what happens when you move past that and you start moving into a world where, in fact, you need to be the person that's appreciating it for another time? And with the rise of the camera, we all started going as tourists. And we started with what I call vicarious appreciation. You'd be at Niagara Falls or the wildlife place, and you wouldn't be looking at the water or the animals. You'd be looking through a viewfinder. And this morning when I was walking around Geneva, there were some tourists photographing a garbage truck. I'm not sure what they wanted from the garbage truck. Was it study? Was it beauty? Was it entertainment? Was it utility? Why were they appreciating it later instead of now? Maybe they just liked their camera, who knows? But the important thing is you took photos possibly to look at yourself later on, possibly to share with others. And so the rise of the selfie and the smartphone, in a sense, doesn't change anything, but the ease of doing this changes everything. To the extent that we see our good friends here not looking at the Mona Lisa, but looking away from the Mona Lisa. The only way they'll see the Mona Lisa is when they look at their selfie on the internet. I'm not sure what this gentleman was thinking, but putting yourself in the picture is now the height of narcissism. You don't even need a friend with a camera to do it. You can do it yourself. And here's a spectacularly manic British Prime Minister. I'm not sure what he was thinking. He's got a very old mobile phone, which dates everything a lot. But putting yourself in the picture leads to an interesting set of things. The first one is, of course, this narcissistic tendency. The second one is not only you're not appreciating it, you're not even looking at it. And the third one is if you are now that the reward for doing this is not for yourself, it's for sharing it. So it's the vicarious nature that other people will be viewing it, increasing your follow account or viewing it, or giving you some higher powers as a result of your going out. Then for the other people, they are seeing the world online. They don't need to be there at all. Their sense of beauty comes in increasingly from never going anywhere and from looking at not the Mona Lisa, but the picture of you with the Mona Lisa. So all of this creates a new vortex of desire where I think it's perhaps a nihilist narcissistic tendency. And I think as we get on to robots and so on, this becomes more important. And here's one at a modern art exhibition where we can go infinite levels down. The self-referential piece. So taken to extremes. You haven't seen many selfie sticks, but the selfie stick is the new in thing. You should get yours now before everyone's got one. And it's brilliant. Here it's almost an extension of the man's penis. And of course, you note in every case, they are not looking at the scene. They're hoping someone else looks at the scene later. And sometimes the scene's exciting, and sometimes the scene's not that exciting. But let's turn to the future. And, we started off today with a robot. The robot said something about beauty. And, of course, the robot knows nothing about beauty. And now we come to, I think, what's particularly interesting in beauty in the age of the future, which is, will the robot ever understand beauty? And the answer is no, unless beauty conveys that evolutionary advantage. We will program the robot to enjoy beauty, but in a calculated, statistically optimized manner. It's not going to enjoy beauty. It's going to look at a sunset or look at a fresh-smelling fruit or the temperature, and we will put our desires or goals onto that so that the robot, in a sense, appreciates it because it homes in, it optimizes for those things, but it does it in the same way that, at least initially, that the cockroach does, without any knowledge, without appreciation. And that's really probably the fascinating thing that divides man from others, which is that appreciation and that abstraction. Of course, the robot isn't the only thing. We are going to be creating all new worlds. I don't think there's that much to be said about the new worlds. The new worlds will have their own dark recesses. They'll have their own beauty. But I think one of the really interesting things is we increasingly have the power to create ourselves. The enormous availability of venture capitalist money, the rise of a new generation, of which I think I'm one of, where every problem is just there for you to solve. If there's a problem and you think it's an interesting problem, a cool problem, one that can get funded, you will solve that problem, or you will put it on your to-do list and kick yourself when someone else does. There's a new generation hardwired that is their capability to solve any known problem. And many problems are becoming increasingly easy to solve because, as Newton said, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. We can create software modules easily. We don't even need to create the hardware in many cases, with Kickstarter and other things. So we have the capability more than ever before to create solutions and create problems. And those problems and solutions, as we look to some future where we are creating artificial worlds for ourselves, do we bring any sense of ethics, any sense of good and evil? Or in fact, is it just lots of developers thinking, I have a problem to solve, and I don't believe there's a beauty or an ethics or an art problem. These are bigger picture problems than I can understand for myself. I just want to make my app get more users, and in my small way, I will optimize for whatever it takes to get there. If beauty and aesthetics and a wonderful user interface is part of that, so be it. If a minimal user interface is part of it, so be it. And if thousands and thousands of data points that say this link should be in green, not blue, and it will get 1.3% more clicks, so be it. I don't think there's a right and a wrong. I think there are many people that will, thousands, millions of people in this brave new world, all doing their small part. I play a part in that, but I'm also conflicted. I'm up till 2 a.m., I'm writing emails, I'm writing documentation, and I'm listening usually to either Bach or Wagner. It's often background, and occasionally it's just so beautiful that you'll stop, pause everything, and listen to it. And other than sharing it with you now, I'm hopefully still at the point where it's a solo pleasure. But please do take pictures of this and tweet them. Thank you very much.